Hi strangers, are you ready for a Halloween story? Hello strangers, I knew you'd be back. Can't keep away from these terrors now, can you? Oh hello. Yes, it's nearly Halloween time and we're going to have a Halloween story today. A very scary, horrific, terrifying story. The most horrendous horror story you're ever going to hear. This is the Halloween story from your horror movie nightmares. This story is called Halloween Movie Murders. On a cold night, on the 30th of October, on a cold, chilly night, the trees all look like skeletons, with their brown and orange leaves piled all over the floor. We look down the road and we see 4 big houses, all in a line. All look the same, with the same layouts, with big trees all down the side of the road. Halloween is tomorrow. Halloween is that time of the year when the small brats come to your door wanting sweets, standing with their buckets and their bags and their cheap Halloween costumes, shouting at you, calling trick or treat. Why do they demand candy on this night? They don't even scare me, Dan thought as he sat on the step outside of his house, smoking a cigarette, while pumpkins sat on the wall beside him. The pumpkins carved with snarly faces. Dan sat there in a strop. Why should I give sweets to these annoying babies? Why do the parents let them knock on strangers' doors? Dan was a hardcore horror fan, you might say. Dan got up and stepped hardly on his cigarette on the floor. He opened the door to his house, and inside was full of horror movies, horror DVDs, and horror Blu-rays, the posters of horror movies, figurines of horror characters. His house was completely full of horror collectibles. He walked over to his TV and put on a horror movie. Freddy Krueger was playing from his TV set. He wanted to show the kids what horror was really about. He thought he would make it so they would never bang on his door again. Dan had come up with the most amazing plan. He went to a large cupboard underneath his stairs and pulled out a big notebook. Yellow post-its on the sides, on the edges. Scribbled on the front of the notebook was the best deaths in horror movies. He was planning to kill the whole street. He walked down to his basement with his notebook. And of course he's a fan of Saw. As he went down, he saw his life-size Billy doll sitting in a chair on the desk in the basement. There was a plan of the street and a bunch of keys. He sat looking in his notebook. He had lists, lots of lists of everyone's daily activities. He'd been watching them, all of them, that whole past year, ever since he left his job. And tomorrow, on Halloween morning, and tomorrow starting on Halloween morning was when he planned to start. He got to bed early and smiled to himself where he pulled up his covers. He sat thinking about his plan. and smiled to himself, pulled the covers up to his face, and whispered, "I see dead people." Dan was up and standing outside of his neighbour's house with a bag. He opened the door with his bunch of keys and walked up the staircase. He couldn't wait to perform this. This was from his favourite movie, and one of the best well-known deaths there is. The movie he had in plan was Psycho. The shower scene, of course. He knew the mother of the family took a shower at 7 o'clock every morning, and absolutely loved the movie Psycho. He opened the bathroom door, took a knife out of his bag, and stabs the mother 5 times. The mother drops to the floor in the shower. It was quick and quiet, just as Dan had thought it would be. The woman didn't even get a chance to scream. The next death was one of his second favourites. It was a scene from Jason vs. Freddy. Her husband was asleep in the bedroom. Dan crept quietly and slowly to the bedroom, then viciously stabbed her husband, then cracked him in half in their fold-up double bed. Crack. Dan cleaned his knife and put it in his bag, then got out his notebook. He couldn't help but smile. His plan was coming together, and the kills thrilled him so. Their daughter was next. The daughter was outside playing. Dan opens the door and sees a sewer opening. He opens the lid and climbs down the ladder under the ground. Dan then puts on a clown mask and calls over the little girl. "Hello, little girl. I have a balloon for you." The little girl gets closer and closer. Dan grabs the girl's arm and cuts it off, and then drags her in through the storm drain. He takes off the mask and gets out of the drain. He was thinking about the next house. It seemed pretty easy because they all watched TV together in the morning, and he wanted to perform one of his favourite kills he had ever seen in a movie. He opens the back door with his keys. He puts in some headphones. Of course, the song that he could hear was Hip to Be Square. He put on a see-through rain jacket and took an axe out of his bag. The music played loudly in his ears as he walked towards the sofa that the family were sitting on, and he swung his axe and managed to kill all 3 of them all at once with one swing. He looked down at the bodies and said, smiling to himself, "I hope you didn't need to return any videotapes." He smiled and smiled to himself. He couldn't believe how easy this was. He had so much fun performing his favourite. He had satisfaction from performing his favourite kills. 2 houses down. Now for the next family. The next family was a single mother with her 4 children. They took the school bus every day. The bus started on this road, and the only way he could think about taking them all out at once was the scene from Chainsaw Massacre. You know, that terrible bus scene? Dan waited behind some trees and took a chainsaw out of his bag. He put on the mask. You know the one. This was a very special mask, one from his collection. He watched as the children got onto the bus, and as the last one got on, he barged through the door, revved up the chainsaw, and cut off the bus driver's head, and then turned to all the screaming children, leaving them all dead and all cut up in tiny chunks. There was so much blood. Dan was heavy. He kept on his raincoat. The chainsaw stopped working. Dan threw it on the floor. He needed to go back to his house. He knew he had 20 minutes spare before he had to go and get their mother. He emptied his bag and took some needles and put them into his pocket. He walked over fast to her house and he knocked on the door. Bang, bang, bang. The woman opened the door and noticed the blood on Dan, the blood on his clothes. Her eyes opened wide and she says in a panic, "Are you hurt?" Dan looks at the floor and starts to wobble. The woman runs to steady him and he slowly pushes the needle in the back of her neck and she drops to the floor. He quickly drags her body across the street to his house, down to his basement, and attaches her head to the reverse bear trap from Saw. He steps back to admire his work, then ties her hands down onto a metal chair and gets on with his plans. He had killed everyone on his road, and it was done so easily. He got changed and went outside and lit a cigarette while holding his blood-stained clothes. He walks over to his barbecue, opens the lid and lights it, and throws on his clothes and throws on his blood-stained clothes. He smiles to himself and then frowns, thinking that he should have done maybe more kills than this. But still, he had one more left, the one he wanted to watch. He walks down to the basement to find the woman wiggling and awake. He walks over to a small TV and puts on the movie Saw, and then he starts to talk. "Mandy, I want to play a game. Your children are dead." The tears were running down her face. "Your children have ruined my Halloween for too long. You need to learn a lesson. Children shouldn't knock on strangers' doors and take their candy." Mandy was struggling to get free, but Dan walked over and pulled the pin from the trap, from the head trap. "You will learn your lesson." Snap! The device opened and blood sprayed all over the walls. Her head was torn in half, torn apart. Dan walked upstairs. He looked up the road. It was so peaceful, so perfect. No one was going to interrupt his Halloween. He bent over and lit his pumpkins and whispered to himself, "This is Halloween." Well, wasn't that a great Halloween story to hear? How peaceful is Dan's Halloween night going to be now the children are gone? I hope you enjoyed this story today. And remember, don't upset your neighbours. Thanks so much for coming along and watching my story today, my Halloween story today. And don't forget, you have the most horriblest of Halloweens yourself. And please subscribe. I did write this story for you after all. And please check out my links in the description below. That's the least you can do for me for Halloween, since I am the Halloween queen after all. Oh, was I a bit rude? Sorry. Well, take care of yourselves. And don't forget, have a great Halloween. Goodbye.